What appears at first glance as confidence in a narcissistic woman is often something far more fragile, something constructed rather than inherent. Her sense of self is not rooted internally. It is borrowed, piece by piece, from the reactions of others. Compliments, admiration, attention, these are not luxuries for her. They are necessities. Without them, she does not simply feel less confident. She begins to feel like she is disappearing. This is where the hidden weakness begins to reveal itself. Because when your identity depends on external validation, you are no longer in control of yourself. You are at the mercy of everyone around you. Every room becomes a stage, every interaction a performance, and every silence a threat. If the attention fades, even slightly, it creates an internal instability that she cannot easily regulate. Psychologically, this reflects a profound disconnection from the authentic self. Instead of developing a grounded identity, she constructs a persona designed to extract admiration. But a persona, no matter how polished, is still a mask. And maintaining a mask requires constant effort. It is exhausting. And more importantly, it is unsustainable. Over time, this dependency turns into a silent form of anxiety. She must constantly ask, even if unconsciously, am I still admired? Am I still desired? Am I still important? And if the answer is uncertain, she compensates through manipulation, control, or emotional intensity, anything to restore the flow of validation. But here lies the paradox. The more she depends on others to feel whole, the less whole she becomes. Because true stability cannot be outsourced. It must be built from within, or it will never truly exist. And so, the very thing she seeks from the world, constant validation, becomes the chain that binds her to it. In the end, a person who cannot stand without applause will always fall when the room goes silent. If you look closely, you'll begin to notice something paradoxical. The narcissistic woman, who so confidently presents herself to the world, is often deeply afraid of being truly seen, not looked at, not admired, but seen in the psychological sense. Seen beyond the surface, beyond the charm, beyond the carefully constructed image. Because to be truly seen is to risk exposure. And exposure, for her, feels like a kind of psychological danger. What she protects is not just an image, but a fragile inner structure that cannot withstand scrutiny. The persona she creates is designed to control perception, to ensure that others see only what reinforces her sense of superiority or desirability. But authenticity cannot be controlled in this way. It emerges naturally, often unpredictably, and it reveals contradictions, insecurities, and imperfections. This is precisely what she avoids. From a deeper psychological perspective, this fear reflects a disconnection from what many would call the shadow, those parts of the self that remain unacknowledged and unacknowledged and unacknowledged. Instead of confronting these hidden aspects, she distances herself from them, projecting strength while internally guarding against any situation that might reveal weakness. And so, when someone begins to see through the mask, when they stop reacting to the performance and start recognizing the patterns, it creates a subtle but powerful disturbance. She may respond with defensiveness, dismissal, or even aggression, not because she is strong, but because something within her feels threatened. To be known in a real and honest sense requires vulnerability. It requires the courage to exist without constant control over how one is perceived. But for someone who has built their identity around control, this kind of openness feels intolerable. And so she remains trapped in a cycle, always visible, yet never truly known. But here is the truth you must understand. When you stop being impressed by the image and start seeing the reality beneath it, you reclaim your power. Because the moment you see clearly, the illusion loses its grip. Beneath the surface of control, charm, and calculated confidence, there is often something far less visible, but far more powerful in shaping her behavior. A deep emotional emptiness. This is not the kind of emptiness that comes and goes with circumstance, It is more persistent, more structural, as if something essential within the self was never fully formed or has long been disconnected. You might notice that no matter how much attention she receives, how many people admire her, or how many victories she seems to achieve socially or emotionally, it never quite satisfies her. There is always a need for more validation, more stimulation, more intensity. And this constant seeking is not driven by ambition alone, but by an inner void that refuses to be filled. From a psychological standpoint, this emptiness often stems from an underdeveloped sense of identity. Instead of building a stable inner world, she becomes dependent on external experiences to generate a sense of aliveness. But external experiences are fleeting. They provide temporary relief, not lasting fulfillment. And so she begins to chase emotional highs, drama, conflict, admiration, even chaos, because in those moments she feels something. Even if that something is unstable or destructive, it is still preferable to the silence of emptiness. This creates a cycle that is difficult to break. The more she depends on external sources to fill the void, the less capable she becomes of confronting it directly. And the less she confronts it, the deeper it grows. Over time, this can lead to increasingly manipulative or intense behavior, not out of calculated malice alone, but out of an unconscious attempt to escape that internal vacuum. But here lies the uncomfortable truth. No person, no relationship, and no amount of attention can fill a void that was created within. And if you find yourself caught in that dynamic, trying to be the one who fills it, you will eventually discover that you are pouring into something with no bottom. Because a void that is never faced will never be filled. Control for her is not simply a preference, it is a psychological necessity. It is the mechanism through which she maintains stability in a world that internally feels uncertain and unpredictable. When she can influence how others feel, think, and respond, she creates the illusion of order. And within that illusion, she feels safe. But this is where the hidden fragility begins to emerge. Because control, by its very nature, is never absolute. People change, circumstances shift, and reality does not always conform to expectation. And when that control begins to slip, even in small ways, it does not feel like a minor inconvenience. It feels like a loss of ground beneath her feet. You may notice how quickly her demeanor can change in these moments. What was once composed and confident can become reactive, tense, even volatile. This is not random. It is the psyche attempting to reassert dominance over a situation that is no longer predictable. The intensity of her reaction is often proportional to the degree of control she feels she has lost. At a deeper level, this reveals a fundamental inability to tolerate uncertainty. To exist without control requires a certain internal resilience, a trust in oneself that does not depend on managing everything externally. But when that inner foundation is weak, control becomes a substitute for stability. And so she may resort to manipulation, emotional pressure, or strategic withdrawal, anything that can restore the previous dynamic where she felt in command. Yet, Each attempt to regain control only reinforces the underlying dependency on it. This creates a paradox. The more she tries to control, the more fragile she becomes. Because her sense of self is now tied to something inherently unstable. And for those around her, this can be disorienting. You may feel as though you are constantly being pulled into a subtle game, one where your reactions are monitored, your boundaries tested, your independence quietly challenged. But the moment you stop participating in that game, something shifts. Not externally at first, but internally. You begin to step out of the structure that her control depends on. Because the truth is simple, yet often overlooked. Control only works on those who are willing to be controlled. And when you reclaim your autonomy, her greatest source of stability begins to dissolve. If you observe closely, you will begin to see that what she pursues is not love in its truest sense, but something far more strategic: power. Not always in an obvious or aggressive form, but in subtle psychological ways. Power over how others feel, how they respond, and ultimately how they perceive themselves in relation to her. This is why her connections often feel intense rather than genuine. There is a constant undercurrent of influence, as if every interaction carries an unspoken objective. She may draw people in with charm, attention, or emotional depth, but beneath that surface lies a need to establish position, to feel superior, desired, or indispensable. From a psychological perspective, this pursuit of power is not born out of strength, but compensation. When the inner self feels unstable or insufficient, dominating others can create a temporary sense of certainty. If she can affect your emotions, if she can make you seek her approval, then she momentarily escapes her own internal insecurity. But this dynamic comes at a cost, because relationships built on power are inherently imbalanced. They cannot sustain trust, nor can they foster genuine intimacy. Over time, people begin to feel the weight of this imbalance. They may not immediately understand it, but they sense that something is off, that their role is not to connect, but to reinforce her position. And so, gradually, those relationships begin to fracture. Some pull away quietly, others resist, and a few may confront the dynamic directly. Each of these outcomes threatens the very structure she depends on, leading her to either intensify her efforts or abandon the connection altogether. This is the paradox she cannot escape. The more she seeks control over others, the less she is able to truly connect with them. And without real connection, the very thing she desires, significance, validation, importance, becomes increasingly out of reach. For those caught in this pattern, it is easy to mistake intensity for meaning or control for care. But once you begin to see the difference, the illusion loses its power, because real connection does not require dominance. It requires presence. And the moment you stop confusing power with love, you stop playing a role in someone else's illusion. There is one response, more than any argument, confrontation, or emotional reaction, that quietly dismantles her entire framework. And that is indifference, not the kind that is forced or performative, but a genuine withdrawal of emotional investment. Because everything we have explored, her dependence on validation, her fear of being seen, her need for control, her pursuit of power, relies on one essential element: your reaction. When you react, you participate. Whether it is admiration, frustration, confusion, or even anger, it feeds the dynamic. It confirms that she has influence, that she occupies space in your zuhan, that she matters in a way that reinforces her internal narrative. But when that reaction disappears, something far more unsettling takes its place: silence. And silence, in this context, is not empty. It is revealing. It removes the feedback she depends on to maintain her sense of self. Without that feedback, there is nothing to reflect back the image she has constructed. No resistance to push against, no admiration to absorb, no emotional energy to manipulate. This is why indifference often provokes one of two responses. Either she escalates, attempting to provoke a reaction through intensified behavior, or she withdraws, seeking validation elsewhere. In both cases, what you are witnessing is not strength, but dependency being exposed. To remain indifferent requires something that stands in direct opposition to her entire structure, internal stability. It means you are no longer anchored to her perception of you, nor are you seeking to change hers. You simply step out of the exchange altogether. And in doing so, you break the cycle. Because without your engagement, the dynamic cannot sustain itself. What once felt powerful begins to dissolve, not through force, but through absence. This is not about winning or proving a point. It is about reclaiming your attention, your most valuable psychological resource, and choosing where it is directed. And when you truly understand this, you realize something profound. The most powerful response is no. T reaction. It is detachment. Because what you refuse to feed eventually fades.